no matter what the challenge is, how difficult it may appear to be, there is always a way forward. Unless I do something outside the box, I just need to be satisfied.
Do you think Africans are hardworking?
The more and more that you're doing it on a daily basis, the more it almost becomes second nature. Kind of made me start to understand what it is to be an expat.
And there are unique opportunities in Africa that actually can scale the world. Welcome back to Say Africa, a podcast where we share real stories of success from people with African roots and connections in the UAE. So if you're looking for real talk and a blueprint for making it here in the UAE, then this is your home, because we spotlight voices that understand the unique challenges, cultural nuances, and the resilience that come with having roots from our beautiful continent of Africa, and really just trying to make it in a new city. And today I have an amazing guest who is a master connector and has built an incredible community of some of the most successful people in the UAE. And you know what they say, your network is your net worth. So if you want to be part of a community that is growing and going places, make sure that you subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it and be part of the Say Africa community. Now, with that, I welcome my guest today, who has roots from not one, but two African countries, Kenya and Tanzania. He's the sales director of the prestigious business members club, the Capital Club, and he's known as the Capital's Connector. Dave Chaga, karibu to Say Africa.
Asante sana, pleasure to be here.
Now, Dave, I'm so glad that we finally managed to get some time from you. I know you're doing many, many things, so thank you so much. This really means a lot to myself and the Say Africa community. Where do we begin? Now, your unique vantage point, having experienced life across continents, and now actively fostering business between this part of the world and Africa, it's of incredible value to our viewers and obviously myself. And I want to uncover your story and your perspectives on the vast opportunities that lay within Africa, this region, and ultimately, finding out what your blueprint is to making success. But I want you first to take us back to your early years. Now, you have ties with Tanzania and my beautiful country, Kenya. Could you share a little bit about your family background in these two countries and how your early life shaped your worldview?
Well, firstly, pleasure to be on the podcast. Great to hear people talking about Africa, what is the potential there. So in terms of my upbringing, my start in life, so I was born in the UK. My mother was born in Tanzania, my father in Kenya, and they always had, some degree of overlap. But the moment they moved to the UK was really about setting up a new start, new life, new beginning over there. So we used to go occasionally for family weddings and, to occasionally go on holidays, etc. So always there was an affinity with Africa, but it only really progressed when I actually started in the business world.
Great. Now I understand that your maternal grandfather had quite a journey moving to the UK and building his life literally from scratch. That sounds like it might have been quite a tough journey. How did hearing his story and his journey impact you and your understanding on perseverance, resilience, and ambition?
Yeah, in fact, that was the word I was going to say. Resilience is so key. Because again, a lot of people, they've developed considerable amount of wealth and success in Africa. Yeah. However, given the colonial situation and how politically things may change, then they obviously had to move. So this was with both sets of, my grandparents, that this had some kind of impact or implication. So, whilst it was very, very much a case of building one step at a time, one brick at a time in terms of success in Africa, many of these people who are very gifted in business, who had achieved a lot, had no option but to start from scratch. And doing that is never easy. However, in the UK, there's so many success stories you hear, people from Uganda, Tanzania, across East Africa as a whole, and further afield, where they've gone to the UK, and because of their work ethic, they've actually managed to really, build that next chapter.
And do you recall life being tough in the early years? as you and your family were rebuilding?
For me, not really, because I think the hard work was done before I was even born. So I think when my mother and father were newly married, starting to actually kind of scale up their business, by the time I was born, things were already a lot more straightforward. So I didn't really have to see the hard graft so much in terms of how to build the business. It was more how to scale the business.
Excellent. Now, on your Kenyan side, was it your father who got into the car business through his passion for safari rally? I mean, I fondly remember the rallies.
Yeah, so I think everybody with some form of connection to Kenya and East Africa, they have rally somehow within their blood.
Absolutely.
And I think, it was a case of my father and his brothers. They were always interested in the rally. Whilst they may not have been so frequently, it was always a thing in terms of, who's won the rallies and how to kind of modify your cars, do something unique to kind of make your car stand out. So in fact, that's how their business started.
How did your dad's then passion turn into an actual business?
So
when you think about the rally, you think, yeah, you're a racer, you sort of modifying cars, but then he actually was able to build a substantial business.
I mean, this is the thing. It kind of happened, whether it be coincidence or whether it be just circumstance. But because they always wanted to make their cars look different, I think that's definitely an East African thing. How to kind of stand out. And again, with how we dress as well. It's a little bit different, but that's what gives us our identity.
That's who we are as a people.
So effectively, they started with such a simple idea in terms of cutting rubber, hand carved, and then actually kind of applying it to the back of the cars to kind of make it look like mud flaps. And then it just so happened that one of the buyers from Nissan had recognized and then immediately started dialogue as to how they can get 50 pieces, 100 pieces. And then before you knew it, the volumes kept on growing and growing and growing to then the point where they couldn't actually just do this in an ad hoc, at home type of situation.
Right.
They had to kind of formalize how they're going to do it in mass volume.
That's insane. I mean, Nissan, a brand that's got heritage and history.
Exactly.
And you've got your dad who started from, a sport that he enjoyed in the UK, as you mentioned, cutting rubber. I mean, it speaks volume about innovation and just identifying unique opportunities. And they are unique opportunities in Africa that actually can scale the world.
Of course. And I think sometimes it starts with such a simple idea,
right.
And then that sows the seeds for all the other opportunities. So whilst it started with cutting rubber by hand, then it became Mercedes. So a lot of the classic vehicles you see with the three-pointed star mud flaps, we manufactured those for all of the old vehicles. So, things then escalated much, much more quickly, where it then became injection molding of rubber and then learning new technologies and then how to kind of add that to then more product lines, more innovation. But again, just started from rubber and rally.
Amazing. When rubber hits the road, as they say.
Exactly.
Now, you've told me before during our discussions that, your grandfather worked in radio.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how growing up with a strong connection to communication as well as storytelling, how that might have influenced your professional journey, especially when it comes to, building relationships now, which is part and parcel of obviously your role, and facilitating deals.
So I never was really that close with my grandfather.
Okay.
I think because of the different continents and many other reasons. But it's funny to see how sometimes these skill sets are still kind of in the blood, so to speak. Right. And it's one of those types of things where I tend to find I'm always people facing.
Okay.
Always actually kind of in the communications game effectively. Because the only way to kind of connect people when it comes to business is to understand their problems.
Right.
So things have kind of scaled up from there. And then in terms of media these days, it's so important in terms of visibility. Everybody wants to know more about how to do business in the UAE. They want to understand where are the opportunities, who to align with, how to work. And at the same time, everybody also understands that Africa is one of the continents with the largest amount of resources in the world.
Yep.
So how to align and how to connect the two. So again, media is so important because, again, people want to understand who they can work with, to understand what are the potential risks and where are the opportunities also.
Absolutely. Now, you touched on tech there, and just wanted to find out, given where we are today, it's 2025, with all this tech advancement and AI especially, do you think we could outsource relationship building to technology?
Possibly at a lower level. However, when it comes to in-depth requirements, I think technology cannot replace that human touch. Sometimes you need to actually dig in to understand that the concerns are not what are being expressed,
Right.
but there's an underlying issue or concern. And it's kind of understanding people skills to try and figure out what could be the solutions in certain cases. Sometimes you might have a major dispute between two international parties.
Right.
And the only way to resolve that is to go below the surface of ego, below the surface of what is appearing to be the issue, because sometimes those issues are just put there as defense mechanisms as well.
Right. And there's a lot going on today and from a macro capacity, and maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later on this. Now, when we spoke the other day as well, what you said resonated with me quite deeply, because it's advice that also my parents have given me. You mentioned that a key lesson from your father was him telling you that first impressions are very, very important. And I must say that no one in this city can touch you when it comes to your suits, especially the color. Today you're wearing, it's a bit muted today, but I think anyone that knows you, that has seen you around town, knows you for having bright colored, great tailored suit. Now, how is first impressions important in your mind in the business world, and especially here?
So I think part of it comes down to you might not necessarily be able to have a conversation with the people when you first meet them. They may be, owners of major conglomerates, or they may be billionaires. To strike that initial conversation might not always be possible. However, if you manage to command yourself in the right way, they will notice you. And then they will perhaps recognize you a second and a third time in the right circumstances. So whilst there might not be any verbal communication, it still is an initial kind of sounding board as to how someone might perceive you. So impressions always count. And those first impressions, how you dress, how you carry yourself, and then if you are having a conversation, how you carry that conversation as well is so super important. Because people form a judgment based upon all these types of interactions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Now, there's another connection that we share. You studied in Scotland, didn't you?
I did indeed, yeah.
That's actually where my granddad is from. Now, tell us what that was like. Do you think your kids will go to St. Andrews?
You never know. I think they'll definitely wish to study in the UK.
Okay.
But St. Andrews just kind of came by passing. I mean, as a youngster, just about to finish A-levels, I was very keen to see the bright lights of London, and to go to LSE, Imperial, or one of those kind of main,
Top schools,
reputable universities. However, it was actually my father who suggested, at that moment in time, that I wish for you to go to St. Andrews.
Okay.
You'll play a lot of golf, and in terms of the network you built.
Okay.
So it was already kind of inbred in a way from him that how important it is to be surrounded by the right types of people.
Okay.
And I used to have to pinch myself sometimes walking around St. Andrews, because on one side you've got Prince William, Kate Middleton, who are in the same year as me, walking around campus with security everywhere. Then you've got like the son of Guggenheim Museums, so many prominent people who are just very understated, there to enjoy those 3-4 years and to really study. And it was a beautiful, beautiful period of my life.
It's incredible. Do you still have their contacts?
Some, not all have stuck. The only thing I don't miss about Scotland is the strong wind.
Yes. Yes.
But beyond that, it's a beautiful place, and so much to enjoy there. And that really kind of set me up in terms of that middle ground between education and actually entering the real life business world. And I realized during that time as well, and in those first few years afterwards, that degree, certification, qualification is useful to some degree, but without people skills, you really need that in today's world when it's far more competitive.
Yeah, I think a lot of the learning and the value happens outside of the four walls, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Before we segue to, current day and the Capital Club, which I really want to dive into, I want to ask you a little bit more about, navigating family business, which is an area that you obviously have experience in. And there are people that would be watching us today who are in a family business or going to be inheriting family businesses. What was your experience like, and what advice would you give, knowing what you know today, on just how to best navigate family businesses and, of course, all its challenges?
Well, family businesses can be incredibly beneficial for everybody involved, but at the same time, they come with their own challenges, as we experienced. I think I've seen it on many different angles, not just from my own personal experiences, but some of my very good friends who still have a lot of activities across Africa. Okay. So, it really comes down to also the dynamics between the family members. When you've got a huge batch of the next generation coming in, then it's about how do you differentiate in terms of salary, expectations, who will have which types of roles, how you balance that. So part of it even comes down to legacy planning as well. Okay. And then how you want to scale up the business, how you actually look to raise capital, how you look to kind of expand into new different verticals. So there is a lot of kind of scope and potential. But the thing is, it's so much so much more raw than the corporate world, because again, in a corporate world, you've got board members taking decisions, et cetera, et cetera. In Africa, it's more beneficial not to have all of that level of red tape as well, because you see the opportunity, you can jump straight in. Right. But again, comes with its own challenges for sure.
So what advice would you give somebody navigating some of these challenges?
It's always good to have a third-party view as well. Okay. Sometimes you're too much in the situation or circumstance that you could be blinded by reasons that are not actually relevant.
Or you may have certain. Where do you go to seek this third-party view or advice?
Well, you could go through consultants, but again, that can be very, very costly. Sometimes it's good to go through, friends or acquaintances that you've known for a long time. Mm. That also, one thing is it's very important that they have an understanding of Africa. Right. Without that understanding, it's hard to differentiate what makes Africa unique compared to Europe, the Middle East, US. It's completely, completely different. Absolutely. Family businesses always have the same problems in terms of intergenerational wealth, succession planning. These are all major, major factors. How to keep the continuity of growth, how to prevent the next generation from not necessarily being focused, let's say. So all these challenges come into the equation. Africa, it can either make or break as well, because you have far more different factors to consider. You've got the political regime, you've got the taxation regime, you've got the competitor analysis. Everybody wants to be in Africa right now. Sure. So there are so many different angles to consider when it comes to family business. And whilst it can be, very, very lucrative, sometimes one change in the family dynamic can either disintegrate the business or take it to the next level.
Completely agree. And we see a lot of examples here in this region. I think family businesses here is really the order of the day. What I find quite useful is how they segment different businesses, so siblings or, aunts, uncles, etc., sort of delegated to different verticals. And I think that's an interesting way of, keeping things at peace. And, perhaps keeping people at their most strengths value. Now, I find, the dynamics of family business to be so layered, and it's one of those areas that many people still struggle quietly. But the advice that you had on, you can go, the sort of professional route in terms of getting advice from the consultants, that obviously comes at a fee, but also just speaking within, again, going back to the importance of your network, right? Now, you also explained that you expanded your family business overseas. I believe there was, an Australian element. I believe you went to Tanzania. Talk to me a little bit about the nuances of expanding a business beyond the borders that the business initially started.
Oh, well, it can be very, very tricky. You don't necessarily know all the challenges that you'll face off the outset. So I remember when the business had been operating in the UK for a very long time in terms of the automotive manufacturing side, then expanding into Romania in terms of reducing the costs for manufacturing. These were all kind of logical logical steps.
Right.
But then moving to Australia and starting to secure business there was a completely different type of challenge. You would like to think that the UK and Australia have a lot of similarities.
Right.
But the more I actually realized within the business community there was far more of a monopoly focus. It was very hard to break those boundaries, especially when you're dealing with the likes of Mitsubishi, Nissan, Toyota, a lot of these major car companies. And I realized that unless I do something outside the box, I just need to be satisfied with those one or two contracts that were already in hand. Then I was thinking to myself, how do I crack it? And I realized that there's only one way, and I guess it's kind of passive aggressive in a way.
Okay. Tell us more.
So basically, knocking on the doors, trying to make all the effort, trying to meet the right types of people, and realizing zero result.
Right.
That nobody was willing to kind of bite beyond my existing supply. So then I thought, okay, right now I have a channel where I can almost manufacture for any different vehicle, given the volumes are sufficient.
Okay.
The only reason I cannot enter is because of either the relationship the existing monopolist has got within the market, whether it be price driven. So I started with one and saw what the feedback is, basically taking the line of dear customer ABC, what I'd like to do is get a list of all of your volumes across all the different product lines.
Okay.
And then ideally, if you give me target prices, if I beat those target prices, by all means, I'd much appreciate you give me all those volumes.
Okay.
However, if you don't give me those product lines and you don't give me at those target prices, then I have no option but to release all these parts into the aftermarket. So on one side, I said you can use it as a cost reduction exercise.
Right.
However, if you choose not to give me the business,
I'm getting in this market anyway.
Exactly. So that completely flipped the dynamics. And me being quite a lot younger than the buyers and all these different OE car companies kind of put things at a position where they had no option. So that also helped considerably in terms of confidence to realize that no matter what the challenge is, how difficult it may appear to be, there is always a way forward.
That's bold and incredible. And how long were you out there in Australia?
It was about 3.5 years.
Okay.
So in fact, my son was born there as well. It was a great time, thoroughly enjoyed. Okay. And it kind of made me start to understand what it is to be an expat. Whilst I was always born and bred British, studied in the UK, Australia was that kind of first taste of what life is like as a Brit outside, which kind of sowed the seeds very nicely in terms of moving to Dubai, which now it's been about 10 years.
Brilliant. Now, a lot of people that would be watching this are founders. You know, there's a very vibrant startup ecosystem in the UAE. I mean, part of that ecosystem. And one of the ambitions of founders is obviously to scale beyond the country, beyond the region, and really to go global. What advice would you have for a founder who is looking to expand their business beyond their current borders now?
I think the most important thing is to first have your house in order in terms of where your existing market is. You know, if you have any instability within that market, then that can completely affect how you kind of focus on new markets, new territories. And you've got to be prepared for the what-if scenarios. So almost every other day I'm meeting somebody who's moved new to Dubai, looking to join the club, looking to find ways to diversify their business to be more focused on the Middle East, for argument's sake. Yeah. And they always need to have that little bit of a buffer in terms of runway to expect the unexpected and be prepared for it. Otherwise, you know, it's very much a market with so much opportunity, but it can also be uncompromising as well at times.
Okay. So be very mindful while expanding.
Exactly.
Overseas. That's great value. Now, you play a very, very active role at the Capital Club. I mean, you're known as the Capital Connector. And I've had the pleasure of actually experiencing this value that you bring to just people around you. You're connecting people across borders, you know, people who might be here looking to do business in Africa and vice versa. What advice would you have for somebody who wants to perhaps be this super connector and wants to grow their network? I guess what I'm asking is, how does Dave approach networking, relationship building, that then ends up in facilitating, $1 million business deals?
Well, I guess there are many people doing it in different capacities without necessarily realizing it sometimes. I guess it kind of goes part and parcel in terms of the role of where I am within Capital Club, being the only private business members club. And essentially what I tried to do is translate the skills that I was doing for our own family businesses, for our own day-to-day requirements, into kind of the broader spectrum of the UAE. It's sometimes I don't even know what to expect on a given day. Wake up in the morning, like take a breathe in, have a coffee, and just be like, okay, now I'm set for the day. I don't know what the day's going to throw at me, but, have to be ready, have to be prepared. And that even happens, like, no matter how many meetings I've got set up throughout the day, I'll get that phone call or I'll get that message to say, we want to come in, we want to discuss, and you have to be ready. So in many ways, like, whilst I was focused on maybe 2-3 core industries or sectors or main kind of experience prior to joining the club, these last 4 years has allowed for, being involved in deals for restructuring, refinance, private equity, venture capital, all different kind of spectrums and, across the world as well.
You're almost experiencing a masterclass at work, aren't you?
Yeah, and part of that is where I see I'm adding value between people. Yeah. But it's equally as important to listen to people and to understand more about their industry and sector. Because the more I understand, the more I can kind of fine tune. And I guess part of my process is to introduce people like A to B where I think it could be the right fit.
Okay.
But then also to ensure that the conversation keeps on redirecting back to the point.
Okay. Another thing I'd just add there, and this is just based off of what I've experienced thanks to, the connections that you've made, is when we're having a conversation is you're already joining, it feels like you're already joining the dots in your head and you make that connection instantly. I mean, you're making calls while I'm speaking to you. And then by the end of this discussion, the person that you want me to meet is at the club, which I find fascinating. Now, on the flip side, what advice do you have for people that perhaps actually have a network, but instead of facilitating for connections, end up being, gatekeepers and aren't willing to connect people, put people together?
Well, I don't really see the advantage in trying to separate parties all the time. At the end of the day, even if you connect people together, it doesn't guarantee that a transaction is going to happen.
Of course.
And everything is built down on trust. At the end of the day, as long as you have confidence on both sides, then the information will filter the right way. It is always daunting when you try and introduce people together, especially in the early days, to try and hope that there's a good fit. But I guess the more and more that you're doing it on a daily basis, the more it almost becomes second nature. And, it's one of those types of things now where often I say to people is like, this could be potentially mutually viable. Yeah. Please don't take it as a given or as a guarantee. And then it becomes more and more a case of, reading people, and then it becomes the point where the chances of success become much, much higher.
Absolutely. Now, I agree with all those points. And having that caveat, right? And again, it's investing in knowing people, in really building that relationship, right? Now, you've touched upon the idea of a natural collaboration between this part of the world, UAE specifically, the Gulf and Africa. Could you elaborate a little bit on why you see this synergy and perhaps what specific industries could really benefit from collaborating? Because, you've got entrepreneurs, say, from Africa who are looking to perhaps expand here, or entrepreneurs here that are looking to, get some foothold into Africa. What industries and what opportunities are you seeing?
So I think part of the reason why the Middle East and Africa align so well is on one side you've got, compared to the rest of the world, an abundance of deployable capital.
Yes.
And on the other side, you've got an abundance of natural resources. So with those two aligned together, it becomes very interesting in terms of satisfying both sets of needs and empowering both sets of economies. Because I think the Middle East, whilst everybody understands that it's all really started from oil and gas and then diversified in terms of construction, real estate, tourism, etc., they're still looking for new opportunities and new frontiers. Africa, again, because of the labor costs, because of the access to raw materials, allows for them to diversify, for them to expand, and for economic empowerment across Africa as well. So the fit is very, very well aligned. And then that's before you even get to the fact of the trade routes through the UAE and the Middle East. It allows for products from Africa to be distributed across the rest of the world.
Yes.
I mean, you see the likes of DP World and such powerhouses who are now entering Dubai in such a big way. Even the likes of Emaar have got to focus on, developing more and more and more of their projects across the world as well. So it's very, very well aligned, very well positioned, where I think the two can work hand in hand. I mean, there's always going to be access to capital from the Far East, from the US, from Europe, etc. However, the Middle East now has a lot more focus on Africa. Okay. And I think Africa is now starting to become understood a little bit more than in previous decades.
Very true. But if I was to just hone in on, say, 2 or 3 sectors that you're potentially seeing a lot more traction on, what are these industries?
So mining has always been a major factor.
Okay.
I think that's always been something of interest. Energy, power as a whole being a staple requirement. Yes. Food, import, export, again, the ability in terms of agriculture for producing product there has always been very, very strong. But then there's been some other very interesting sectors that have kind of come. I think now everybody sees that there is a potential in terms of the tech side.
Yes.
There are a lot of capable people across Africa. And then even down to data centers. There is so much scope in terms of different lines of business where Africa is perfectly positioned, I feel.
So if you're listening today, there's been some worthy opportunities that Dave has mentioned. Thank you so much for that, Dave. If I could ask, what is your vision for the future of Africa from a business context? What would you like to see?
I would like to see Africa now, really being considered as a global a powerhouse.
Okay.
In comparison. At the end of the day, it has strong labor force, strong population. It has an abundance of raw materials and resources, natural resources. But really to be considered on the same level where everybody gives the respect that Africa, I think, deserves now after the decades that it's kind of gone through to reach this point.
I couldn't agree more. Now, you touched upon human capital. We're in the hundreds of thousands now in the UAE. A quick question there. Do you think Africans are hardworking?
Very much so. I mean, people often kind of misunderstand Africans. They, whether it be they consider because of colonial ties or whatever it may be. But when you actually see, yes, Africans generally smile. They're very positive. They're very optimistic. But that does not kind of necessarily suggest that they're not hardworking. I tend to find that Africans have that inbuilt hunger to keep on growing, to keep on surviving, to keep on looking for new opportunities, how to grow, but they do it with positivity.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, this whole podcast is dedicated to finding those great stories.
Yeah.
So if you care to find out more, make sure you stick around. Let's now segue into the Capital Club mainstay. Do you have any celebrities that are part of the membership club?
We do indeed. We've got some celebrities, and then we've got many, many kind of names that you would recognize if you were to be walking around town.
Some big business titans.
Exactly. And it's not just only in the UAE. I tend to meet, people who are very, very famous from New York, LA, all the way across to Oman, Qatar, Bahrain. The UAE has really kind of cemented itself as kind of almost to be considered the epicenter of the world now in terms of business.
Couldn't agree more.
It's always been the case as a tourism hotspot, but now everybody sees that it's very, very useful, beneficial to have part of your structure, part of your setup in the UAE, or make it your home. And this is why we tend to find that there are so many high-profile people, whether you call them celebrities or, business magnates, who tend to be often in the club as well.
Brilliant. Now, with that, what kind of people does a Capital Club tend to attract, and what can members expect by joining the Capital Club?
So it really is a wide mix in terms of backgrounds and nationalities and different industries. So like broadly, we kind of categorize them into entrepreneurs,
Okay.
C-suite executives,
Okay.
ministers, ambassadors, consul generals,
Okay.
some of the owners of major conglomerates as well. In fact, just the other day I was in the club and there was a CNN reporter who was sitting next to me a few days before. Then there was somebody who's often kind of interviewed on Bloomberg and CNN talking about what's happening within the US industries. So you tend to meet these types of people that you wouldn't necessarily normally meet. The types of conversations people are having, okay, everybody likes to relax and enjoy and kind of switch off a little bit. But when they're talking about business, this is really with a view that they have actual kind of hands-on experience of what's going on in that sector, like their finger is on the pulse.
Great. And what kind of events do you guys host at the club that brings members together?
So we normally split them into the two different aspects. You've got the business events
Sure.
and then the social aspect as well. So on the business event side, these are normally kind of together with our different committees and our in-house team. So it could be from NFTs to cryptocurrencies to policies and regulations in the UAE, roundtable events, fireside chats. So it's kind of broadly kind of broken down into many, many different points of information, but with a view to informal networking as well. Because again, you may have like institutional investors there. You may have, family business owners within those same circles, which kind of to intermingle and to understand, that's where you can start to potentially form those bonds and develop where there could be opportunities. Then on the social side, in terms of wine tasting, whiskey tasting, cigar evenings, jazz evenings, which is far more informal. So it's kind of a combination of those two, as well as to have your own private meetings, invite your clients, etc.
Great. So it's not just the networking, but really being kept abreast of regulations and all things necessary for one to be successful.
Yeah, it's kind of like a toolbox in a way. It gives you all the skills. And then the key is how best do you utilize?
Fantastic. Now, looking ahead, what are your aspirations for the Capital Club and its role in supporting business leaders here in the UAE?
I think things are moving so much in a fast-paced environment right now. And there are so many different forms of mediums as to where people can get information. There's an event every other week happening in Dubai in terms of different conferences.
Absolutely.
And what I tend to find from a lot of the people who come to me is they don't really see the value or the benefit in a lot of these external events, because it doesn't necessarily give them that window to understand the industry or sector or to necessarily meet the right people. So the key for the club is really to stay fresh, dynamic, to be talking about the topics that are relevant right now, and to bring the right types of people together also.
Yeah, I find that in a more sort of intimate setting, people are able to get a lot more value versus, these large-scale conferences sometimes. So it's good to hear that members are able to have access to these intimate settings where real value is exchanged. What are your personal growth aspirations as a global business connector?
Well, every day is different. I think that's the easiest way to put it. There are opportunities that always keep on coming forward, and it's nice to be a part of people's journey.
Right.
So as they grow, it's nice to grow alongside, for sure. And also to be considering these people not just as business partners or to be involved in certain aspects of their requirement or growth, but also to develop stronger friendship and bonds alongside as well. So I think these last 4 years have been quite a journey, stepping outside of the family business environment to be then directly front and center within the business community. And where that will translate to in the next 4 to 5 years, I'm looking forward to see how the journey progresses.
Amazing. I mean, Dave, you're surrounded by, some of the most successful people in this country. In fact, recently it was reported that Dubai is now home to 81,000 millionaires, and I think it was 20 billionaires. That's wild for, population, the size of the UAE,
True.
right? How do you stay grounded?
It's very, very difficult at times. It's, I mean, so say for argument's sake, you go to the Royal Atlantis or you go to any of the brand new hotels that are here. Seeing a Rolls Royce is an everyday kind of occasion. It doesn't really kind of make you feel like it's unattainable, which is actually a good thing in many ways. The fact that we're surrounded by this abundance of wealth and success and watches and cars, you almost become immune to the fact that whilst people, in certain parts of the UK may never even feel like they'll ever see a car like this or be able to own a car like this, here it's a constant reminder, which is in many ways, rather than consider it as a reason to just go with the flow, is a motivating factor.
Okay. What does success mean to you, Dave?
It's very much two-pronged. It's very much important, I feel, to be growing in terms of business opportunities and to keep scaling up in terms of your own personal success. But personal success doesn't necessarily only relate to that side.
Right.
It's also having a balance in terms of your time, to find a way to recharge properly, to kind of give back to yourself and the people you care about.
Yeah, I find this city is on all the time. In your view, what does it take to be successful in the UAE?
You've got to have also that mettle or resilience to understand that it's very, very fast paced. It's very high pressure. People, when they come here on holidays, they enjoy the best in terms of all the luxury that we have around us.
Yes.
However, when you're working here, you need to understand that things do move very quickly. If you don't jump on things in the right way at the right time, those opportunities may go elsewhere. And at the same time, not always do those opportunities come to fruition as well. So you've got to have that perseverance to understand that you need to keep on taking each meeting as a fresh meeting, each occasion when you're looking at a new opportunity with a clear mind.
Okay. So I don't usually talk politics on Say.Africa, but the recent shifts in global dynamics, from tariffs and market volatility, regulatory changes, it's hard to ignore. And we're now talking in April 2025, and just as a timestamp, because things are moving so fast, and the world as we know it today, as we walked into this podcast, may be very, very different, after this hour. Anyway, I'm curious to hear your take on how these trends, these global trends, influence business operations and the opportunities here in the UAE.
Oh, well, as we're kind of verging into a position where there are becoming a war in terms of tariffs right now, that doesn't necessarily allow for business to flow freely. I think this is where, if we just look at the Middle East as a whole, they're very much taking a neutral stance when it comes to anything that's happening across the world from a political perspective, which kind of really allows for them to be a place where people consider to be home, they can focus on their business, and it's far more straightforward and transparent. And I think that really helps in an economy now where everybody wants to be far more on a global scale.
Yeah, and my take is, the UAE often being, so stable, it's a strategic hub, and many more companies now are diversifying to have some form of base here, and really just using the UAE as a launchpad to, the region and even as far as Asia and Africa, that we've actually been beneficiaries to all the noise that's happening around us. But what do you think from a mindset perspective? If I could ask more directly, what sort of mindset does a leader need right now to be able to deal with everything that is happening at the moment?
So I think, like how you said right now, UAE has benefited considerably given this whole circumstance, because now people are actually looking par on par, London, Paris, New York.
That's who we're being
Dubai,
compared with, yeah.
What are the benefits and the knock-on effects of being within certain economies?
Right.
Now, when you look at the UAE, it wins on all different angles. It's the safest. It's the cleanest. It's the most tax efficient. It's the best for schooling. So in that sense, it's allowed for the UAE to really position itself as the best city in the world.
What are the what are your members saying about what's happening globally? What are you hearing? What are the what's been whispered in the corridors of Capital Club?
I think a lot of people are a little bit concerned right now as to what could be the core reasons for these tariff implications. It's very hard to know, what could be, exactly the reasons, whether it be more in terms of just conflict of, controlling their GDP or import or exports. So, everybody has their own opinion. As for the club, there's always conversations that happen on all these types of topics. Everybody likes to give their opinions. And again, this is where I'm kind of the neutral party. It's like, let everybody express their own way, I guess.
Wonderful. So let's lighten things up a little bit. What are some of your guilty pleasures?
My guiltiest pleasure has got to be cars, and then probably closely followed by watches.
Okay.
I think, I've always been a Porsche fan.
Okay.
And, it's something which, sometimes there's nothing better than just to open the engine and hit the road and take those corners. So yeah, it's kind of one of those types of things. And like most men here in Dubai, watches then becomes another big thing in terms of like Jaeger LeCoultre and, Chopard and Cartier and all these kind of high-end brands that we kind of surround ourselves with.
I love watches too. Cars I really couldn't care too much. No, that's my husband's department.
Yeah.
And yes, you're in the right city then for sure. Now, what is Dave doing when he's not wearing his impeccable suits?
Trying not to be recognized.
Is that possible?
So, yeah, I mean, like, if I'm not dressed formally this type of way, which is most of the time, Monday to Friday,
right,
then, I'm most comfortable in just shorts and a T-shirt, just walking around. And, a lot of people who know me and they see me wearing suits all the time, they don't recognize me.
I'm sure.
So it's kind of one of those types of things. It's kind of blending in a little bit in a way.
Okay.
Like, it's nice to be known and to be seen and to be recognized, but it's also nice just to, have your own peace of mind, peace and quiet as well.
Sure. And how do you balance, the professional side and the personal life? I mean, you're married, you've got children. That can be also quite demanding. What does balance look like? Can you balance?
It can be very, very challenging in terms of like when you've got multiple different kind of responsibilities or, but I guess it's at some point just having that cutoff. Like, I will only work till this time. I will not do certain things on the weekend. It's kind of having those parameters in place. Otherwise, in a city like Dubai, you can work 24 hours a day almost. Easily. And there's always going to be new opportunities. There's always going to be people asking for your time, asking to have meetings. But at some point, it's about just not only just respecting others, but also respecting yourself to say enough is enough. Right. Like, I need to give myself a break.
And what do your children think of Dave, Dad, and Dave, the Capital Connector?
Dave, Dad, I think that can change on a daily basis. But Dave, in terms of the work side, I think, they do tend to find it funny from time to time when they kind of see the new magazine or the new press release or who I've met in those last few days. Right. It kind of, in a way, they're a little bit surprised about it because they see me just being me.
So you're just dad at home.
Yeah, and on the other side, then they see, the one who likes to be seen and known and, meeting all these high-profile people. So it's kind of two different balances in a way. But I guess, in a way, what I would like or hope is that kind of gives them a little bit extra ambition to kind of follow their dreams, follow their skill sets, make the most that they can be, because everybody's different.
But now, you're seeing so much wealth day to day. You're part of, top circles. You're attending great events. How do you keep your children grounded?
I think with kids these days, it can be very, very challenging in an environment like Dubai. But I guess
agree more.
If they see that success comes through struggle, that kind of puts things into perspective. Whilst a lot of people do have an abundance of wealth and success here, you and I both know that it can be an expensive city.
Absolutely.
It's easier to spend than it is to accumulate in many ways.
Absolutely.
And, that's something where, the more children as a whole or the next generation as a whole understand that wealth might be there today, but not necessarily tomorrow. That's super important. Some of the families that I'm very close with, I know the generation elder than me, but then also the generation my age.
Right.
And what's impressive to see is those of my age are so much focused on how to grow the business. They could spend whatever they wish to spend on any given day, but that's not their priority. It's now that they're thinking about what they want to do to keep growing the business and then potentially for the next generation as well.
Absolutely. You get handed a baton and it's what do you do, right? With your
it's
race.
Responsibility alongside.
Absolutely.
It's not just a case of, okay, this be, the fuel for the next 20, 30 years. It's also in terms of legacy, in terms of the struggles that your parents, grandparents may have gone through.
Absolutely.
Maintaining their integrity as well.
Absolutely.
So many different angles. And I think this is where, the Asian, African, Middle Eastern mindset can be quite similarly aligned in some ways that, we have that responsibility to kind of take our family's legacy to the next step, whether that be in business or just in terms of respect and in the right circles.
Absolutely. I would say that a key thing to think about successful legacy is for, 2, 3, 4 generations down the line to actually be touched by your value.
Yes.
And if not, and they don't even know your name, then, it's quite sad.
And in a way, things effectively come full circle in a way. So if I look at my grandfather being he used to be one of the presenters on Voice of Kenya. Which kind of crosses over as to some of the different angles in terms of the media aspects that go alongside my day-to-day work.
Sure.
But then also in terms of my parents, my grandparents, and then also now focusing on business in Africa when they don't necessarily have too much interaction in terms of Africa, more domestic these days.
Right.
So it's interesting to see how things can kind of come full circle in a way, and Africa brings you back.
It sure does. And finally, Dave, what message of encouragement or insight would you like to leave our community with, keeping the spirit of Say.Africa?
So I think right now, it's always been in people's minds to consider that, it might be a challenging continent. We touched on this the other day as well, that, in many ways, the concept of Africa has kind of been put in a box as to, how business is done.
Yeah.
In the Western world, what may have been considered as lobbying or business development or, means of opening those doors is considered as corruption within Africa. However, it's really a case of aligning business interests in many ways that is always important.
Right.
I mean, you make successful introductions. That's also very important, and people value that.
Absolutely.
So the same applies no matter where you are in the world. So I think there is
it's
so
just
much
dressed differently, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the same terminology or the same meaning, but with different kind of wording behind to kind of describe, which takes one from clear to grey. And I feel that that's changing dramatically these days now. I think the world is understanding how important Africa is from food security perspective, water, all of these key factors. So Africa is now the up and coming continent, I feel, that is really going to kind of shine moving forward. And the more those, markets with a similar kind of mindset take advantage, they can work together strongly. So I think the concept of how Africa can be beneficial for people's business is becoming more and more and more so. I think us sitting here in the Middle East is very beneficial. And there'll very much be a two-way flow in terms of Africans who want to diversify their business in the Middle East and then Middle East to Africa as well. And, the opportunities are always there. It's just aligning yourself correctly, like as it may be anywhere else in the world, I guess. But the time is here. You can see now that Africa has so much potential. And I think we're going to find that, there's going to be a lot more skyscrapers, a lot more major cities that are kind of, setting themselves apart across different parts of Africa because they have that access to wealth and empowerment now.
Dave, thank you so much. Now, there could be many, many people that are looking to reach you. How can people reach you? What's the best way to find you?
So more often than not, I'm normally sitting in the members bar in Capital Club or in the members lounge. Then, I guess people can reach by approaching the club directly.
Okay.
Or through my Instagram or Capital Club Dubai, my latest website as well. So
Great.
different ways possibly to meet. Yeah.
Great. And we'll definitely share all the your social handles.
Yeah.
Now, with that, I think we can wrap up today's session. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been great just hearing your journey and your insights. And I hope those of you watching have taken great notes and found great value. So stay tuned to Say Africa.